for more on the significance of the 6-month mark and where the war could go from here, we're joined by Dr. James Dorsey. He's adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Now, Dr. Dorsey, 6 months on, what's your assessment of the international response to Israel's operation? And in particular, we're seeing a huge outcry over the recent killing of aid workers of the World Central Kitchen.
I think we've seen over the last 6 months widespread condemnation and criticism of Israel among much of the world, less so from the United States and from at least various European countries. What we've also seen, though, in recent weeks is increasing frustration on the part of the United States and on the part of Joe Biden, the president, particularly in terms of how Israel is conducting this war. And we finally then saw on Thursday a phone call between Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, in which the U.S. president was very firm about what he wanted. That included the ceasefire, that included significantly scaled up flow of aid into Gaza and protection of civilians.
Let's talk a bit about this U.S. pressure right now. How will this impact U.S. support for Israel going forward? And is this likely to change Netanyahu's mind?
Well, I think that how this will impact U.S. policy going forward remains to be seen. We saw something of a milestone, if you wish, in the last 24 hours with the issuance of a letter by Joe Biden's Democratic Party, which included people like Nancy Pelosi, a heavyweight within the party, someone who has consistently been very pro-Israel, and who is the former Speaker of the Senate, a former Speaker of one of the two houses of the Congress. And so it's evolving, and it's evolving as U.S. public opinion is shifting. How far will that evolve? I think we'll have to see. But what the letters suggested, and maybe a realistic move, is conditional arms sales rather than unconditional arms sales going forward.
And meanwhile, we see Netanyahu facing growing pressure at home as well for both the Hamas attack on October 7th, the hostage situation, and also the trajectory of the war. Do we see any potential shift in domestic politics? And will this put more pressure on Netanyahu as the war continues?
Well, it puts significant pressure on Netanyahu. There's no question about it. And perhaps the most important development is that we've seen the fusion of two separate protest movements, if you wish. One, which was the families and of the hostages held by Hamas and their supporters, which were demanding an immediate release, that Netanyahu do what it takes to get an immediate release of the hostages. And a second part of that protest movement, which was demanding Netanyahu's resignation. Those two movements have melded, and they do represent a significant segment of Israeli society, but there is also a significant segment that feels that the hostages may be collateral damage in a war that Israel needs to proceed. Having said all of that, Netanyahu's space for maneuvering is getting narrower and narrower, particularly if the United States stands on what Biden is demanding. That could potentially put his cabinet in jeopardy, given that goes against what his far-right and ultra-conservative, ultra-nationalist coalition partners would be willing to accept.
And Dr. Dorsey, taking all of this into consideration, what can we hope to see out of the ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas that's brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S.? Is there any chance of breaking out the stalemate in any way?
I don't want to be a party pooper, but having said that, I think it's complex. If you look at these negotiations over the last few months, they're going round in circles. With other words, Hamas has been saying what it says. Israel's been saying what it says. Hamas, in recent statements yesterday, essentially was going back, and that may be the way out of this, going back to what the original proposal was, which was essentially a temporary ceasefire in which a limited number of hostages would be exchanged for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, and that would create a period in which you could negotiate for a permanent ceasefire. Whether that's going to be a workable formula remains to be seen. On paper at this point, the positions between Hamas and Israel are far apart.
And meanwhile, internationally, Israel has faced a lot of criticism and even a court case at the ICJ. Does international pressure through these organizations even have any impact on Israel's actions? And is there any way they can be held accountable on some level?
Basically, international opinion is not something Israel pays attention to. It pays attention to U.S. opinion, and it pays attention to the stance that the Biden administration is taking. We saw that this week, that immediately after the phone call between Biden and Netanyahu, Netanyahu took some albeit very limited measures, but he took some measures to try and answer to at least some of Biden's demands. Fact of the matter is, however, that Israel's international standing has been devastatingly tarnished, and it's going to take quite an effort to repair that damage. And that, of course, works in favor of what's going to happen at the International Court of Justice, that presumably is, in one form or another, going to find Israel guilty. And I think at some point one could see prosecutions at the International Court of Criminal Court against individual Israeli leaders. So for Israel really to turn all of this around, it would have to take bold steps, and those bold steps are not going to come without political change in Israel, and even then it's questionable.
Dr. Dorsey, thank you so much for your insights. That was Dr. James Dorsey. He is an adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies.